I'm Mirei.
I'm Özgecan.
And we are two Kazakhs living in Berlin, Germany.
And this is our nomadic lives. Salim Mirei.
Salam.
It's so cold.
It's so gray season here in Berlin.
Yeah, it's the days of grayness that really tire me out. Is it the same for you?
Tell me, the season when I want to fly every month to Kazakhstan.
But does it get gray? Doesn't it get gray? I mean,
No.
The sun still shines in between, does it?
I don't know. That's like gray winters were discovered here in Germany, in Berlin.
Okay.
My winters back home, they were so sunny, bright, and especially in the north, it's like white snow.
Yeah. No, I know. I love that actually. Also about Astana was you have the white and then the blue sky. Bit like the flag.
Yes.
We're patriots today. No, I'm joking.
Today we are bringing up some important question that we already touched upon a little bit in our first episodes, but to talk about it through the lens of science and research that has been done on the language and the mother tongue.
Yes, and this is based on a book that a friend of mine, actually, she recommended to me, and I was always like, I'm going to read it, but just never found the time. But this was a great reason to read it, and it's called Beyond the Mother Tongue by Yasemin Yıldız, and it's basically about the postmonolingual paradigm. As a sociologist of nations,
yes,
and nationalism,
bring it all in.
I can bring it all in. So basically, in sociology, the whole invention of the nation and nation states is seen as a rather modern phenomenon. And it has to do with sort of the downfall of empires, which were then replaced by nation states. And in the imperial context, of course, it was very common for people to speak different languages or vernaculars being sort of the spoken language, not necessarily written. And with the downfall of the empires, you started seeing these nation states emerging, which really intentionally wanted to unite sort of the people within the states. And this was done with different tools, for instance, writing a national history, having a national language, having a national territory, and the anthem, like the sort of the banal things like the flags and etc. And also this myth of belonging to one nation and of coming out of one nation. And so this paradigm of speaking only one language that belongs to you or your nationality is pretty recent. It came out sort of, around the 19th century. I just want to also put a caveat in there. There are different interpretations of this history. Of course, there are all different theories. This is just like sort of a very, very brief sort of conceptualization by me. So then these ideas around sort of having one ethnicity or one nation having only one language emerge. And Yasemin Yıldız in her book, she kind of turns that around and says, this is actually modern. I mean, we believe that forever we've only ever had one language, but actually the idea of having only one language is the modern idea. Whereas within empires, or even within, not even empire, but within on a single island, you might have had people speaking completely different dialects. This is very obvious in the case of France, for instance, where until the French Republic was founded, people in the south of France couldn't understand people in the north of France. It's a bit different with Kazakh language, I think. Because of the nomadic nature and because of the exogamy, so marrying outside of your tribe.
It was the way of sharing your way of speaking the language, and then it was quite similar.
Yeah, so because at the time, women being the primary caretakers of children, they would inform the child's spoken language so that even if a bride or a mother came into the family from a different part of Kazakhstan, you would have this
being
almost
exposed to
exactly
different.
Yeah, you would bring that with you, your different ways of speaking. And so I always thought it was really remarkable, like given Kazakhstan's size or the Kazakh speakers, geographical size and locations, that there were no dialects. I mean, there are certain little differences nowadays, but that there were no real dialects. Whereas when I lived in Ireland, like sometimes it was really hard to understand someone from the north and then someone from the south.
Oh, I see.
Even though they're all speaking English, right? And that is because of the nature of, these seclusion of certain communities. Whereas if you're roaming about, you're more exposed to each other's dialects and ways of speaking. But that's a whole other side.
No, that's a very interesting perspective. I've never thought about actually how on our big land we pretty much speak one similar language and understand each other. It explains a lot. But also from my perspective, I was looking to every author and book that Yıldız was writing about and researching about through the perspective of a psychological state. Actually, so many people, communities, nations went through this, the process of monolingualism being required, but then having many reasons and background stories for either fitting in or not fitting in. And it's really like I don't know, world, not maybe a world old, like century old for sure, question of being either in between or embracing. And the concept of mother tongue and its direct connection to the identity, it was really beautifully put, starting from this. So first, I'm pretty sure you are more into with all the literature part of it, but and especially because the comparison was in between like German language and in case of Kafka it was Yiddish and German, and the second Adorno was also it was the pure German, and then looking into from inside the Fremdwörter, that the origin.
Yeah, the foreign origin of words. Yes.
Within the monolingual concept. Within. It also is like, there's so much of it in our modern Kazakh. And then
the foreign words.
Foreign words.
Words of foreign origin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Post-colonial condition of the language, to look at it and not to try to purify it, but rather I saw many ways of solution, of actually seeing how the personal struggle meets with this communal situation of like rules and restrictions. And it's very, and especially of course the works that she discussed about the more modern writers who went through migration, globalization,
like mainly like
yes,
she talks about Turkish German writers, or German writers of Turkish origin. It's fascinating, but it teaches a lot and can be a good example of, if we can say, normalizing of our struggles. When you talk about struggles, do you mean the sort of the colonization or the linguistic colonization, or how do you mean?
The consequences of the linguistic colonizations that happened, and we have the result of us knowing the Kazakh language on very different levels for many people. And I see that I know many people for whom it's so much easier to learn several foreign languages, but when it comes to practicing, learning, using of your mother tongue that you didn't grow up knowing, it comes with this internal struggles, I feel.
Yeah. I think it's this idea, and that's why I love the title of the book as well, Beyond the Mother Tongue, because this idea, again, of this mother tongue being directly related, tied to your identity is, I mean, it's new. I think there are like also in my studies of the Soviet demarcation of Central Asia, for instance, areas that are conflicted nowadays are based off of ethnographers' works, categorizing people people according to the languages they speak, right? There are a lot of areas where, for instance, Tajiks will speak fluent Uzbek and Tajik, right? Or the other way around. And then it's almost this artificial separation that doesn't actually correspond to the realities of the way people live. And for instance, like in my case as a diaspora Kazakh, a lot of my generation has lost the language, and instead we've taken up Turkish, and yet we still feel so distinctly different and separate. Obviously, there's a sense of belonging to Turkey and to the Turkish community, but there's also this sense of being different. And so, like years ago, this was probably over 10 years ago, we had these like Kazakh kurultais, and we had also younger people from Kazakhstan start joining these. And it was so hurtful to me that someone posted pictures of us, and all they could write underneath it, these guys speak Turkish, these guys speak Turkish, none of them speaks Kazakh. And I was young and a bit hot-blooded at the time, and I wrote to him like a really angry message, and I was like, how dare you, judge us for not speaking Kazakh, right? Like we didn't have the educational possibilities, and and we are very much aware of the fact that Russian is being spoken a lot as well, if we're going to be on the judging and blaming game of everything, but which is, I think maybe both of us were actually hurt by our conditions, because we did tie our identity so strongly to this languages that neither of us maybe perhaps couldn't speak that fully anymore. But that's why I think this idea of beyond the mother tongue is so beautiful, because especially if you're like growing up elsewhere, and in my case, the language that was spoken to me at a very young age was mainly Turkish. And I don't know what to do with that. Like, I mean, obviously I have an affinity to Turkey and Turkish culture, which also kind of made a huge impact on my sort of cultural understanding of the world. And Turkish is a beautiful language. Turkish has lots of beautiful literature, and I'm not denying any of that, and I know how to appreciate all of that. At the same time, my love is in the Kazakh language, and I think maybe it is sort of this emotional aspect. Perhaps we need to call it our emotional tongue, even if we don't speak it perfectly or something, that we have the most affinity towards.
Well, yeah, I feel that it's a very, very sensitive topic. And then I know I also had some experiences, but not to this extent. And I feel sorry for every Kazakh who had to really follow this idea of mother tongue equals the identity. And then, but in this term also, I think that our podcast, and we started also talking about, even if we didn't use and we don't use right now for our podcast Kazakh language, but English, but we feel that deep inside the roots, like the view of the world, the values and the emotions, and then how we see relationships is really based on a similar ground.
Yeah.
No matter to which extent we used or read or know the Kazakh language, we both know that there is something in it, something strong that really holds us. It's talking about diasporas, and then I already told that for me it's such a great example that your case and then the whole community, the saving of the traditions and the culture, no matter in which language. It's such a beautiful thing that it gives hope. And then it really helps, I think, if for people who see it and who hear it, to have the hope that now life is really unstable and we can't really know where we will be living in several years. And with it's not only unpredictedness, but also our desires to move and to discover. And then however we move, it's the light within that goes with us. Yeah, I want to stay on the hopeful side as you see.
No, absolutely. We are very much used to holding on to traditions in a way because of the fact that, you know, as nomads, you don't carry stuff around with you, right? You leave whatever you don't need behind. Yes. You take what you need, and with only that what you have, with what you need, you continue, you know, living and
building from anew.
Building from anew, and we're so good at that. But also, I feel like there's sometimes there's this dichotomization between sort of the Russian language, the Kazakh language, and I know there's more of nowadays there's more of this sort of embracing of like a fluid, multilingual, and you know, Yasemin also talks about this in her book of the languages, and I think that it's really important. For instance, one thing that I learned from living in Ireland, you know, they held on to the Irish language for so long and still do, and there's still Irish literature being written. The majority nowadays speaks English, but also it's not only the Irish literature written in Irish that is sort of the only literature that counts for Ireland. No, like Ireland has so much beautiful literature in English, and it's precisely because of the Irish that they write so beautifully in English. It's because of the translation that happens from the Irish into the English that the English becomes so beautiful. You know, there are terms for it like Hiberno English. And to make that language your own is also an empowering act, I think. It's an anti-colonial act to say this language has now become mine. You've given it to me, and I'm going to make it mine. And just in that same way, even though I'm not very familiar with it, but I do come across it. You know, the Russian language literature that is written in Kazakh is also Kazakh literature. And also, we are so good at languages, you know.
Oh yeah.
and I think it's also because, you know, of the completely different natures of the languages. They're completely different language families that they stem from.
You mentioned the point about the younger generation losing the mother tongue and mostly using the language of the community they're growing in and living in. Do you see any emotional ties to, like, I know the elder generation is similar, like either here or in Kazakhstan, and in our cases it's some elder people who will ask you, why don't you use your language and why don't you speak? How is it in the community? I understand that at the time it was the solution to integrate faster, to actually to learn and to become part of the community. But right now, when we have the time and opportunity to look back, to reflect, to actually see sides of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of almost left up to everyone themselves. It's an individual choice. There are lots of young people who have come to embrace Kazakh and start learning or, you know, improving their knowledge. I mean, there are still people who do speak mainly Kazakh at home, but they're not as many. Like when our elders decided to go to Turkey, it was a very conscious choice. They were actually offered to go to America. Like the American government had at the time offered them to come to America as refugees, and they would help them, you know. And they were like, no, we want to go to Turkey. It's a Muslim country. It's a Turkic country. We'll feel more welcome there. And so I think that because it was such a conscious choice and there was this recognition of these are our kins, so to speak, there was no big conflict between speaking Turkish or Kazakh at home. So for them, again, it's beyond the mother tongue. It's the postmonolingual. It's not being monolingual. It's embracing all of the languages around them at the time, and they were related. So it wasn't, this is completely different to us. This is, that I think emerged a bit later. And it's actually quite interesting because we have a little garden allotment here, and there's an elder man who has an ice cream truck. He comes by sometimes, and he was looking at me and he was like, I mean, we spoke Turkish, and he was like, "You're not Turkish." And I was like, "Yeah, my father grew up in Altayköy." And he was like, "Neat." And he was like, "Oh, like those guys, they speak Chaghtay." And I was like,
wow.
Yeah, I was like, "Yeah, they're Kazakh." And he was like, because he was Turkmen himself. So he grew up in a Turkmen community in Turkey. And it was interesting to kind of be confronted with that history of the understanding of our own language at the time.
Yes, we can draw a very similar way of, I think, Kazakh language, and not only language, but how to call it right, the
vernacular? No.
Not the vernacular, but the story of the alphabet used in this work Beyond the Mother Tongue. In the example of Özdamar, I think the fourth author in the book, she talks about, I didn't know this, and I learned it also from this book, that as a Turkish woman who came here the end of 60s, and then she learned while she was living in Turkey, and she's talking about through the prism that it was the mother tongue that actually was the source of trauma and questioning within, because, and I didn't know that Turkish was forming, just as you said, as a nation language and connecting, uniting all this vernacular previously.
Is she Kurdish?
She is Turkish. Rural Turkish was differently used, and then after is it Atatürk came, and then before that was Arabic.
The Ottoman script.
Arabic, the German. The
Ottoman script is an Arabic script.
Arabic script, and then they are requesting now building the new alphabet and the language, and then heard that this line from her writing really stood up or was remembered that so in order for me to be able to read what my grandfather wrote, I should not learn this new Turkish alphabet, but rather Arabic then. And this question, and in Kazakh history we also have it's impossible for us to directly access very old writings in Chaghatay or
and that was written in Turkish in the Arabic script.
It's all works of nationhood that are man-made, and when we see the multi-layered history of it and how everything is changing to actually to unite, you understand that it's good to go beyond this monolingual and to see the bigger picture and to learn if you can. And the thought also I had when we came here, and one of the first meetings when I was bringing this kids Kazakh books to read and to the meetings
where we met to have the kids kind of learn Kazakh.
And when I realized that no, you guys don't read Cyrillic, it should be then in Latin alphabet for.
Is that what you thought?
Yes, I was like, it's really a challenge. So how do you, it's possible to keep and to develop further the spoken language, but in order to read the modern Kazakh, the articles, the news and everything,
you need to learn Cyrillic. Like I said, I don't think it's a big deal. I learned it later too. But for the kids, it adds another layer of friction, of course. It adds another difficulty in accessing the language. But there are like certain journals in Kazakhstan, that write in Arabic and in Latin and in Cyrillic. They're actually targeting exactly sort of diaspora Kazakhs who might not have access to the alphabets otherwise.
But it's interesting that to any judging person there is a judgment that can be met with, right? Like if you are asking me to use one language or one script, why don't you then go to the deeper root and use the other one? And on this term we are not going to come to any positive solution. I think the conflict can be just the external and internal situation can just be constant. And what I feel that it is again the personal journey of figuring it out, why the language triggers me so much. I think that was one of the questions that I was growing up with, when like at home my dad would ask me to please speak Kazakh and then use Russian at school. And
do you feel like that created more of a negative attitude in you, that he would insist on it, or did you feel like it was burdensome?
At some point I would be like, but why don't you accept that you really gave me to the Russian school and then I use this language and then I don't know how to say things, and my emotional language through the books was developed in Russian. And I think it was my very personal question to quite the recent time that I like, okay, where should I get the expertise from if that's the level I know the language, and like it's not.
But the thing is also, when I was in Astana so many years ago, I couldn't find a proper Kazakh language class or course. But it was really easy to find a Russian language course, and I actually really liked my Russian language teacher. She was really sweet. But in order to have quote-unquote Kazakh lessons, I had to go to a lady's house, and then it was just the two of us, and she would give me private lessons in a way, and it was all very informal. But you know, for the Russian language, I just had to go to a language school, and there was a Russian language class for me. I mean, this is all very known, but you know, just even Kazakh language handbooks on how to learn Kazakh and all of this are all recently being really developed and really invested in. For instance, sometimes I talk about, you know, how I wish there was more Kazakh spoken and all of this. And my issue is not with the Russian language. I'm not saying like Russian should not be spoken. My concern is that I want the Kazakh to be developed, to be a spoken language, and to not disappear.
I realized from what you were saying that the way the message was delivered to me back when I was a child was not the right one for me to understand it, because the answer wasn't, I felt as if it's a restriction on one language, and then it's like a denial and then the request. But in reality, what my parents wanted is for me not to lose, to develop, to keep it. And it's good to know. And then now I understand. There is a proverb in Kazakh. Басқа тілдің бәрін біл, өз тіліңді құрметте. So you can really, and now I understand that.
Learn all the other languages, or know all the other languages, but also respect your own language.
Yeah, but keep that in you. For all the parents out there who are trying to inspire the kids, I think it's the way of delivery, that it's part of you that will really benefit you if you will know and try to build some connection if you have an opportunity. But then I have a question to you, I think from your professional perspective. Now in Kazakhstan, it's a very trivial but not trivial topic of the language, and then not everyone, but more people learning, but then still this small situations with this person didn't reply in Kazakh or didn't reply in Russian. I need service in this language or that language.
Yeah, I heard this kind of stuff happening there.
Yeah, and it's really this small but the most important things, right? What do you think should happen would help, or how do you see the language situation? And that would really serve from perspective or sociologists, yes. And then also, yes, for us to have some unity. Is it possible? Or, and then I'm also curious, there are so many states here in Europe that have 4 national languages, like
oh my God, look at Luxembourg. It's got like 3. But for instance, you know, in Belgium, the whole Flemish versus French thing is very still contested. Like it's not an easy thing. But there it's also, you also have the regional sort of dimension to it, the territorial dimension to it. And I mean, we read this one article that came out recently, right, about a non-ethnic Kazakh speaking about how sort of the use of Kazakh, I guess the gist of the article was his feeling of exclusion because of the increased use of Kazakh.
Yes.
And almost this
feeling required, or
no, feeling offended at the fact that someone would say, well, I'm going to speak Kazakh in Kazakhstan, you know, and that, because obviously there are also non-ethnic Kazakhs, of course. But the thing is, I think what we sometimes forget is that so far, also because of the way the Soviet Union was built, people have always been accommodated if they didn't speak the quote-unquote national language as a sort of the Kazakh SSR. And, you know, as soon as you don't have one Kazakh speaker, you switch to Russian. And I think there's sort of this, again, because the language is so tied to identity, I almost feel like there's a sort of feeling that, well, if I'm not ethnically Kazakh, then Russian is my mother tongue. And if my mother tongue isn't being accommodated for, then I don't feel included in a way. And this is an issue. And I think it runs very deep because of this equation of ethnicity, language, national, or because, you know, all of this is, again, constructed, right? The whole putting your nationality in your passport thing as opposed to your citizenship, which is, you know, a very weird concept for Western Europeans or the West in general, especially if you look at states like America where everyone's an immigrant, so everyone has all sorts of nationality.
Everyone is American, or everyone is Canadian.
Everyone is American. I think there are also more eloquent sociological studies on the meaning of being Kazakh or Kazakhstani or being of Kazakhstan. But what it boils down to, I think, is in how far can we extrapolate the Kazakh language from being ethnic Kazakh and making it part of Kazakhstan, including everyone. That is to say, you know, doesn't matter who you are in terms of quote-unquote nationality on your passport, but Kazakh language can also be your national language. It can also be your mother tongue, right? And I think it's almost about switching that. And also, I mean, in the book, she talks also about, I think you just mentioned her, the one who talks about Turkish being her sort of trauma language of trauma, right? And I think this has been probably also true for a lot of ethnic Kazakhs, for whom, you know, moving out of their rural area into an urban space and struggling by not speaking Russian, and also Kazakh being heavy on the traditions, especially for women, that then it becomes your language of trauma, and that your emotional affiliation to the language becomes negative, that you feel like you must detach yourself from the language. So I think there are so many aspects of what the language entails to you as an identity, but also as an emotion, to kind of solve that. And I think as a country, a lot needs to be done in that regard. And I'm not only speaking about sort of the ana tili, the mother tongue of non-Kazakhs, ethnic non-Kazakhs, but also of Kazakhs who don't speak Kazakh. And you know, there's this sort of almost this shame around it when you don't speak it, to kind of, you know, dial down on that shame and just be like, okay, what can we do? Are you interested in the language? And why aren't you? And asking each other, maybe that's what we need to do, is ask each other.
It's true that it's very personal to everyone.
Yeah.
Why? Because the answers will be so different.
Yeah, I think it will be very different, but to get a sober understanding of what each language means in terms of belonging, not belonging, in terms of emotion, maybe, you know, love, but also what parts of it is traumatic to you. Yeah.
What I was thinking about is the examples of two female writers from this book, one who migrated from Japan to Germany, and then the other Rosdamar, who was saying that was a language of like non-trauma, the other foreign language. And unfortunately, it proved that there is a strong connection of your emotional states and history to the mother tongue, to the language. And then this Japanese author, Yoko Tawada, she wrote that for not only for her, but for many in her generation, it was the way of traveling not only to the West, but out of the gender social structure. And while I was reading, I could understand because I know what she's talking about.
Yeah.
I know it from my personal experience, and I know it from my study too, that
where you, can we mention?
Yeah.
That you interviewed migrants.
Yes,
to Germany from
like
Kazakhstan.
Migrants living here in Germany, and 70% were women. And the question of the language and identity is really strictly tied to our experiences, to how culture was presented to us when we were growing up. And we were growing up in 90s, in post-Soviet crash time. And when it was after 70 years of the religion, culture, language having restrictions on them, and then everyone, especially in big cities, seeing the way of assimilation, of education, of growth and prosper through the Russian language. And especially, well, even in some studies in social psychology, there is a phenomenon of internal oppression. After years of, in colonial times, for instance, if for more than a half a century, an idea about your characteristic of your culture or something will be brought to you as a negative one, and external voices will be just saying or showing again or just mentioning that, oh, this is something of a bad nature.
Like the savages kind
yes
of thing,
yes
right?
the savages,
So
or
not civilized, uncivilized.
Oh, those rural habits or something like that. And then the result is that voice becomes just part of
It's internalized.
Yes. And I see that we are, as a community, going through the process of like taking those glasses off, I don't know, to seeing, because unfortunately,
it's sort of the decolonization of the mind that's sort of happening right now.
And that needs to happen. Really, it's happening, and it's so important to see, to actually divide or see the difference between, is it really negative about this culture? Or is it because some people believed and wanted us to see that it's negative? Is this tradition or culture really hurting me? What was the initial idea? Or was it intentionally invented because people did know the nature of a humanness and then cared for human and human soul? And
I can understand exactly what you're talking about.
Like so many traditions were misinterpreted.
Yes.
And it's only now that I'm also on a journey of revisiting.
Thanks for listening to part 1 of our Beyond the Mother Tongue episode, and see you in the next one.
Audio and post-production made by Özgecan.
All visuals prepared by Mire.
And our theme track by Dash.
This podcast was filmed and recorded in our home studio.